called Coming to America, 813 AD. They navigated the green sea by the stars and by the shore. And when the shore was only a memory and the night sky was overcast and dark, they navigated by faith. And they called on the All-Father to bring them safely to land once more. A bad journey they had of it, their fingers numb, and with a shiver in their bones that not even wine could burn off. They would wake in the morning to see that the rime had frosted their beards, and until the sun warmed them, they looked like old men, white-bearded before their time. Teeth were loosening, and eyes were deep sunken in their sockets when they made landfall on the green land to the west. The men said, "We are far, far from our homes and our hearths, far from the seas we know and the lands we love. Here on the edge of the world we will be forgotten by our gods." Their leader clambered to the top of a great rock, and he mocked them for their lack of faith. "The All-Father made the world," he shouted. "He built it with his hands from the shattered bones and the flesh of Ymir, his grandfather. He placed Ymir's brains in the sky as clouds, and his salt blood became the seas we crossed. If he made the world, do you not realize that he created this land as well? And if we die here as men, shall we not be received into his hall?" And the men cheered and laughed. They set to with a will to build a hall out of split trees and mud, inside a small stockade of sharpened logs, although as far as they knew, they were the only men in the new land. On the day that the hall was finished, there was a storm. The sky at midday became as dark as night, and the sky was rent with forks of white flame, and the thunder crashes were so loud that the men were almost deafened by them. And the ship's cat they brought with them for good fortune hid beneath their beached longboat. The storm was hard enough and vicious enough that the men laughed and clapped each other on the back, and they said, "The Thunderer is here with us in this distant land," and they gave thanks and rejoiced, and they drank until they were reeling. In the smoky darkness of their hall that night, the bard sang them the old songs. He sang of Odin, the All-Father, who was sacrificed to himself as bravely and as nobly as others were sacrificed to him. He sang of the 9 days that the All-Father hung from the world tree, his side pierced and dripping from the spear point. At this point his song became, for a moment, a scream. And he sang them all the things the All-Father had learned in his agony. 9 names and 9 runes and twice 9 charms. When he told them of the spear piercing Odin's side, the bard shrieked in pain, as the All-Father himself had called out in his agony, and all the men shivered, imagining his pain. They found the Skraeling the following day, which was the All-Father's own day. He was a small man, his long hair black as a crow's wing, his skin the color of rich red clay. He spoke in words none of them could understand, not even their bard, who had been on a ship that had sailed through the Pillars of Hercules, and who could speak the trader's pidgin men spoke all across the Mediterranean. The stranger was dressed in feathers and in furs, and there were small bones braided into his long hair. They led him into their encampment, and they gave him roasted meat to eat and strong drink to quench his thirst. They laughed riotously at the man as he stumbled and sang, at the way his head rolled and lolled, and this on less than a drinking horn of mead. They gave him more drink, and soon enough he lay beneath the table with his head curled under his arm. Then they picked him up, a man at each shoulder, a man at each leg, carried him at shoulder height, the 4 men making him an 8-legged horse. And they carried him at the head of a procession to an ash tree on the hill overlooking the bay, where they put a rope around his neck and hung him high in the wind, their tribute to the All-Father, the gallows lord. The Skraeling's body swung in the wind, his face blackening, his tongue protruding, his eyes popping, his penis hard enough to hang a leather helmet on, while the men cheered and shouted and laughed, proud to be sending their sacrifice to the heavens. And the next day, when 2 huge ravens landed upon the Skraeling's corpse, one on each shoulder, and commenced to peck at its cheeks and eyes, The men knew that their sacrifice had been accepted. It was a long winter, and they were hungry, but they were cheered by the thought that when spring came, they would send the boat back to the Northlands, and it would bring settlers and bring women. As the weather became colder and the days became shorter, some of the men took to searching for the Skraeling village, hoping to find food and women. They found nothing, save for the places where fires had been, where small encampments had been abandoned. One midwinter's day, when the sun was as distant and cold as a dull silver coin, they saw that the remains of the Skraeling's body had been removed from the ash tree. That afternoon it began to snow in huge, slow flakes. The men from the Northlands closed the gates of their encampment, retreated behind their wooden wall. The Skraeling war party fell upon them that night, 500 men to 30. They climbed the wall, and over the following 7 days they killed each of the 30 men in 30 different ways. And the sailors were forgotten by history and their people. The wall they tore down, and the village they burned. The longboat, upside down and pulled high on the shingle, they also burned, hoping that the pale strangers had but one boat, and that by burning it, they were ensuring that no other Northmen would come to their shores. It was more than 100 years before Leif the Fortunate, son of Eric the Red, rediscovered that land, which he would call Vineland. His gods were already waiting for him when he arrived. Tyr, one-handed, and Grey Odin, gallows god, and Thor of the Thunders. They were there. They were waiting.